Imagine driving through Nairobi when flashing lights suddenly appear in your rearview mirror, cutting through traffic and demanding your attention. Then, two traffic officers step out of the vehicle behind you, calm, composed, and authoritative in every movement. At this moment, you are convinced enough that these are real police officers, so you do what anyone would do by pulling over without hesitation. At first, it feels routine and ordinary, just like any other traffic stop on a busy road, but within minutes, that sense of normalcy begins to unravel in the most terrifying way possible. Because before you can even process what's happening, you are handcuffed, blindfolded, stripped of control, and millions of shillings are gone. Because these are not real police officers. On the morning of January 23, 2026, along the busy stretch of Kyang'ombe and Old Mombasa Road, a Chinese national was flagged down in what appeared to be a completely standard traffic stop. She was flagged down by a dark gray car, registration number KDT, which was occupied by two men in what appeared to be traffic police uniforms. To her, nothing seemed out of the ordinary as such. Encounters happen every day. The men approached her vehicle wearing reflector jackets on their full police uniforms. Their presence had been calculated, as they had a sway of confidence in everything they did, and every detail had been carefully designed to mirror legitimate law enforcement. And like anyone placed in that situation, she complied. She handed over her license, followed their instructions, and trusted that she was dealing with officers of the law. But in a matter of seconds, the illusion shattered. The routine stop transformed into a calculated ambush as two men suddenly forced their way into her car, took control without resistance, and executed their plan with chilling precision. And just like that, exactly 2.14 million shillings, money she was carrying in the vehicle in cash, vanished with no trace. The robbery was so smooth that there were no alarms raised, no desperate struggles, and there was no intervention from passing motorists. Just a clean, controlled operation that ended as quickly as it began, and one that left behind confusion, fear, and a haunting realization. But what she didn't know in that moment was that this was only one piece of something far more organized, an operation far more deliberate and far more dangerous. Because across Nairobi, along the same highways and busy roads, more drivers were being robbed by individuals who looked, spoke, and operated like real police officers. And behind it all was a coordinated network moving quietly through the city, adapting, shifting identities, staying one step ahead, hidden in plain sight, and posing as the very people meant to protect us. And what's even more mystifying is that the Chinese woman had just withdrawn the 2.14 million shillings from DTB Bank Mombasa Road branch and the Standard Chartered Bank Samir branch. So, how did these robbers know that she was carrying this large sum of money? Who were they, and how had they managed to operate in plain sight without being stopped? Welcome. This is Dark Hour Docs. In the days that followed that incident with the Chinese national, what initially appeared to be a single, well-executed robbery slowly began to take on a different meaning. Because as detectives and victims started piecing together their experiences, it became increasingly clear that this was not an isolated event, but rather the beginning of a pattern that had already been in motion long before that morning. Across Nairobi and its surrounding areas, particularly along the Mombasa Road corridor, more reports began to surface, each carrying an unsettling similarity that was too precise to ignore. Their victims were not chosen at random, and neither were the locations. Most of those targeted had just completed transactions at major banks within the same stretch, withdrawing large sums of money before continuing with what they believed were normal routines. They were unaware that from the moment they stepped out of those banking halls, they were already under silent surveillance, being tracked, observed, and studied by individuals who understood exactly when to strike. What made these incidents even more disturbing was not just the loss of money, but the method that was consistently used to carry them out. Because every case involved the suspects presenting themselves as police officers, dressed in full police uniforms, complete with reflector jackets, and backed by an unquestionable level of confidence and authority. They did not behave like criminals improvising in the moment. Instead, they moved with structure and intent, approaching their targets with calm precision and initiating what appeared to be routine traffic stops. They had mastered the art of robbery, causing fear, using authority, and the ability to cause confusion while carrying out a psychological hit. And what was coming next was a wave of robberies after another. On February 11, 2026, Sachin Kumar Mittal, a finance director at MFI Group, was intercepted moments after withdrawing 1.9 million shillings from DTB Bank in Westlands. Just after withdrawing the money, a white vehicle speeds up and blocks their path. Two men, one posing as a traffic officer, step out of the white car and starts exchanging words with the victim. In the footage, the driver of the white car is seen preparing to speed away after the altercation becomes physical. They then snatch the cash from Sachin and off they speed off after a daylight robbery. However, by mid-March, the pattern had not only continued but intensified. On March 17, 2026, another target of the gang walked into a bank along the same Mombasa Road corridor, this time at Equity Bank in Utawala. A man withdrew 4.2 million shillings for what was meant to be a routine business transaction, unaware that, just like the others before him, his movements had already been noticed, tracked, and marked. This was money meant to pay for an order of steel near Gateway Mall along Mombasa Road. From the moment he stepped out of the bank, the operation had already begun because somewhere nearby, the same network was watching and waiting patiently for the right moment to pounce. And as he approached the area near Gateway Mall, that moment came. 4 men emerged, dressed once again in blue police uniforms and reflector jackets. They carried themselves with the same controlled authority, but this time the approach shifted, because instead of a routine stop, they introduced something far more powerful, an accusation. They claimed that he was involved in narcotics trafficking, and at that instant, everything changed. Before he could question the accusation, the situation escalated. He was handcuffed, forced into their vehicle, and blindfolded, completely cut off from his surroundings. Inside the vehicle, there were no form of negotiations or any time wasted because they already knew exactly what they were looking for. And within moments, the 4.2 million shillings he had withdrawn from Equity Bank was gone, taken with the same precision that had defined every attack before it. Hours later, he was abandoned in Karen, disoriented, stripped of both money and control, and left to process an experience that had unfolded so quickly. But even then, the operation did not slow down, because another incident was unfolding within the same area along Mombasa Road. A woman who had been entrusted with 1.4 million shillings from KCB Bank along Mombasa Road set off towards Cyan Business Park on a motorcycle. She was simply completing a task like any other day and was unaware that the gang had already identified her as a target. As she reached the busy stretch near Cabanas Interchange on the motorcycle, a gray Mazda CX-5 suddenly blocked their path, forcing them to stop immediately. They were forced off the motorcycle by people in police uniform and into their vehicle, where the operation escalated. The gang robbed them the 1.4 million shillings, along with their phones and sense of safety. They later dumped them near Komarock Hospital in Utawala, both shaken, with the robbery mirroring all the other incidents recorded in Nairobi over the previous 2 years. At this point, these robberies could no longer be ignored, as they maintained consistent similarities. The robbers were in police uniform and reflector jackets, their precise execution, specific targets after withdrawing money, operating along Mombasa Road, and the common use of a Mazda CX-5 as the getaway vehicle. Those actions didn't go unnoticed. By then, investigators were already closing in, and time was no longer on their side. For months, the gang had moved through Nairobi with a confidence that came from knowing they were always one step ahead. They blended into traffic, switching vehicles and manipulating the very image of authority to create space for their operations. But as precise as their system had been, it was never invisible. Because with every robbery, they left fragments of a trail that investigators were steadily beginning to piece together. Detectives from the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, specifically the Crime Research and Intelligence Bureau and the Operation Action Team, had shifted their focus from isolated incidents to coordinated patterns. They analyzed how the gang moved, their timing, vehicle descriptions, and the recurring use of police uniforms and reflector jackets. This is a good example of an image of the Mazda CX-5 that was used in a couple of robberies and the same vehicle with different number plates. Such evidence allowed the slow reconstruction of the structure of this network that had relied heavily on disguise, speed, and psychological control. The breakthrough came through a combination of forensic leads and intelligence gathering, pointing detectives to 3 individuals. The first to be tracked down was Boniface Kilonzo Maniki, who was apprehended along Lusaka Road after investigators narrowed down his movements. His main role in the operation was to provide the vehicles that were used in the robberies, marking the first significant crack in the network. Not long after, detectives moved into Dandora Phase 4, where Josephat Musili was arrested. This brought them closer to understanding how the gang coordinated movements, as Musili was tasked with coordinating attacks and providing information on potential targets. He was the link between people and the information needed for them to target specific victims. The final arrest extended beyond the city, leading investigators to Kalawa Shopping Center in Makueni County. Here, Muya was captured, a significant accomplice. With the arrest of these 3, detectives had the trio believed to be at the core of the operation in custody, dismantling the structure that had allowed the gang to function so efficiently across multiple locations. Critical evidence alongside the arrests included the Mazda CX-5, believed to have been used in the robberies, reflector jackets, and a military jungle hat, items that had played a central role in creating the false image of cops. The group had been systematically changing number plates on their vehicles to evade detection and carried out carefully coordinated attacks. And yet, despite the precision, planning, and weeks of successful operations, the system had ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own pattern. Now in custody, the three suspects remain at the center of an ongoing investigation as detectives continue to pursue additional leads in search of other members of the wider network. Nonetheless, the most dangerous part of this operation was never just the robbery itself, but how easily it all felt real for the victims. Also, how did the gang obtain information regarding specific bank withdrawals and the exact time and place? This has been Dark Hour Docs. Thank you for watching.